Have you ever wondered if that laptop sitting on your desk could power these open source models you're always hearing about? Let's talk about that. All right. Welcome, humans, to another electrifying episode of the Neuron Podcast. I'm Corey Noles, editor of the Neuron, and here with me is the Neuron's writer, Grant Harvey. How's it going, Grant?
Good, good. How you doing, Corey?
Oh, I'm doing good today. Excited to have this conversation because I think there's a little bit of confusion around open source when it comes to people from a non-technical background trying to understand what this means to them.
Yeah, definitely.
So, with that said, today we're going to dive into DeepSeek, the Chinese AI that broke the internet earlier this year.
Yeah. Have you ever tried DeepSeek, Corey?
I have. I've used their web portal.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done that as well. I've never actually run it on my machine, which we'll get into as to why. Um, but I have messed around with the portal a little bit, and there's different versions. Kind of like ChatGPT.
Hmm.
There's the regular version of it, and then there's the thinking version, which I think is what has a lot of people excited. Is that R1 is what it's called? It's
Yeah.
like ChatGPT's O1.
I will
It's
say
R1.
I've read some crazy stuff out of its thoughts.
Well, I think you showed me one where it was like it could think perfectly in the style of Donald Trump, which which I thought was pretty funny.
It did, and there was another one, I read the other day, and I can't remember what it said right now, but it was about, it was trying to think and trying to work through a problem, and it couldn't do it, and then it's like, "Okay, well, maybe I'm gonna just take a different approach here and stop," and it goes through this whole it was kinda comical, the approach it took to it. Um, from the front end, it's good. I mean, it's not I haven't, like, stopped using ChatGPT to use it more, but
Right,
it's
right.
fine.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that it broke the internet. It also broke some laws too, which was an interesting aspect of this that we got to talk about because it's not like this is just another chat bot that you can just compare against ChatGPT. I mean, that's kind of complicated. It's got some interesting allegations against it. Some alleged military ties to China's military. They may be stealing chips, breaking U.S. laws, and maybe kind of a security nightmare. So I don't know if this is the something you want to just like spin up for funsies. You got to know
And
what
there
you're
might
doing if
kinda
you're going
be
to use this.
nothing we can do about it at all, is
That's
kind of
right.
the other interesting aspect here, but I guess first
Yeah.
let's kinda set the stage here with who DeepSeek is.
Yeah.
If I was gonna put it in one quick sentence, I think what I
Uh-huh.
would say is that it's a Chinese AI company releasing fully open source models that rival GPT-4, but also came out to rival O1.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. It's definitely China's version of OpenAI, except they're giving away the secret sauce for free. So O1 obviously was this big guarded secret by OpenAI. They didn't want to tell it. They didn't even want to show people its thoughts. They were just telling you its thinking.
Yeah.
When DeepSeek came out, it was like R1. I'm talking about. It was the complete opposite. It was like we're just going to show you the exact train of thought and show you everything. Oh, and you can download it and run it for free. Have
Yeah.
fun.
That's the statement that I think throws so many people off. What I will say is that what I remember is it was January 20th,
Mm-hmm.
2025.
Mm-hmm.
I have some investments, nothing major, little stuff mostly, but I do own a little NVIDIA, just for full disclosure here to everybody.
Yeah.
And
Same.
I woke up that morning and I saw it. Uh and my heart dropped into my stomach, and I could not I immediately got online, started figuring out what was going on, and it was, somewhere overnight, everyone really freaked out about this. It was like I joke that's kind of the day Wall Street noticed.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I had people who don't really follow AI talking to me about like, have you heard about DeepSeek? It's like, have I heard about DeepSeek? Like, yes, I've been talking about it for months at this
Yeah.
point. But yeah, there was a just to clarify to people who missed it on January 20th, there was a big market crash kind of in reaction to DeepSeek kind of catching on, and I think there was some big stories in CNBC, Bloomberg about it, and that
Yeah.
was when, like you said, Wall Street kind of caught on with what was going on.
Yeah, it was like we knew it was that's the thing is, like, we already knew it existed, but
Mhm.
that was the day that Wall Street had their "Oh my god, AI" moment, and,
Yeah.
it was quite a day as I recall.
Yeah, I think NVIDIA crashed 17% in one day. They lost about $600 billion. Biggest single day drop in US history, I believe. Oh, and
Oh.
also Jensen Huang, great guy, but personally lost at least 21 billion that day.
That's
The
hard to
and
even fathom.
yeah.
Man, what was it about $1 trillion wiped out or something like that? It was a lot,
Yeah.
and it was fortunately, it was short-lived, though.
Yeah, that's right. It kind of recovered right away. Everybody had really good talking points. I don't remember exactly what they were, but essentially they were like, well, the whole reason everybody freaked out, which we'll get into in a minute, is because DeepSeek's method of running the AI, they can run it a lot more efficiently. So it's a lot more efficient. When it runs, it doesn't require as much power. It doesn't require as many chips, allegedly. So, or the rumor was that it didn't require as many chips to train, and I think that's where there was a little bit of confusion. I
Yeah,
think we even ran a headline that said like, there's a rumor that it only cost them 5 million to train this thing.
$5
That's
million
actually
dollars
not
to train
true.
a research model is pennies in the bucket.
Yeah, and that actually wasn't true. It was the last version of it that was the version that we saw. That was the Yeah, that was the one that cost 5 million. And then they still had all these chips that they, whether they got them legally, whether they smuggled them, we've heard reports that some people are like smuggling chips into other countries with like chips in briefcases, like crazy stuff, like to
Yeah.
try and get around export laws. But yeah, the whole thing was that it can do it more efficiently, and then that would crush Nvidia's market cap and Microsoft and all these other companies. And they're like, hey, more efficient AI, that just means more AI,
Yeah.
and the market recovered pretty quickly.
Yeah, essentially, it killed the moat.
Yeah.
The moat you always hear about, all of this about the expense of training, the time it takes, it kind of r reshaped how the market was viewed for an awful lot of people for a short bit, I would say. It didn't stay crazy, but it's pretty wild experience to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, and basically this all happened because DeepSeek is this tiny. I mean, technically, it's not even an AI company in the traditional sense. It was like I think it was like I don't know the exact term, but it was an investing company
Yeah,
essentially.
they were a hedge
Uh,
fund.
that's right.
It
I
was a
wanted
hedge
to say
fund.
hedge fund, but I wasn't sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, started by a hedge fund, and, it's kinda crazy how that all came together. So I've got a question. So
Yeah.
so I'm gonna get to the meat of the discussion here real quick.
Let's do it.
So these models are free, they're open source. Can I just run DeepSeek on my laptop?
So technically, yes, but also technically no. And let me
Yeah.
explain both sides of that. So let's just get a couple definitions out of the way. So open source, right?
Yeah.
That means in software, that means that the code is freely available. Anyone can spin it up and run it themselves.
Yeah.
In AI, it kind of
And
has a
modify it.
different. Yes, yes, that's key. You can fork it, is what it's called, where you take the
Yeah.
code and then you edit it. Um, and obviously, open source and AI is a little bit different. They give away what's called the weights, and so the
Yeah.
weights, yeah, as you know, Corey, it's essentially the what's the best way to put it?
The
It's
settings,
the Yeah,
kind
it's the
of.
settings. It determines how the AI responds. It determines based on this input what is the output that it creates. It's not
Yeah.
a 1-to-1, because it's probabilistic. It's not deterministic, which means like it's kind of predicting instead of having a exact answer every time.
Yeah.
But they release the weights, and usually they don't release the actual underlying code and how they trained it or anything like that.
Yeah. And essentially, those weights are how they dial up or down expected behaviors. Like, if a
Correct.
model is behaving in a way that for one reason or another is undesirable, maybe it's out of alignment, maybe it's something else, They can adjust the temperature. They can adjust a variety of levels on the back end to,
Uh-huh.
I'd say, dial it in, basically, is what they're doing. Just like almost like you
Yeah.
would a guitar amp.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And because these machines work like human brains do, uh, they have like a lot of neurons, which they call parameters, and this thing has like 670 billion parameters, and it requires a ton, like 1.5 terabytes of this thing called VRAM, which is virtual RAM. It's like memory, and it's a beast, right? If you were going to run this whole thing, you would need a ton of NVIDIA chips. You would need like probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in chips and computing software.
So I can just
So
run to Best Buy is what you're saying, right?
you would have to run to like 10 Best Buys and buy everything. Like I don't think like this is not if you were gonna run the full version of this thing, you're not gonna be able to
Yeah.
to do it on your home machine.
So
Um,
it's kinda like trying to fit a data center into your MacBook.
Exactly. And interestingly, so even if you were trying to self-host this like on AWS, I mean that
Okay.
could cost you like $70,000 to $118,000 per month. So it gets up there because these things are
Wow.
huge.
In case anyone doesn't know, AWS is where, it's a hosting platform that hosts a lot of apps that you use
Yeah.
every day and the websites you visit and the software you use. So much of it lives on AWS or Azure or other options that are out there as well. Um, so I feel like this makes the argument that this is like free and open source, which sounds all fun loving and hippy dippy. But the
Mhm.
truth is, this isn't a thing. You're just going to go download and run on your laptop and have this super secret AI that no one can tap into, is what we're saying, right?
Yeah, that's unlikely for most people with DeepSeek. Now, I'll give a caveat there, which is so that's the big version of DeepSeek, right?
Okay.
That's like
The
DeepSeek
research
V.
model.
Yeah,
Okay.
V3. So there's been three versions of DeepSeek that's come out before. That's why you and I had heard about it before it crashed the
Yeah.
market. And then there's R1, which is the thinking version, which is kind of some like a iteration of V3, essentially, like kind of
Yeah. The
putting
one that was
code.
kind of released around the same time as a one.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the one that caused all the panic because it was like
Yeah.
thinking and it was kind of comparable to O1 in terms of its quality. Now, it wasn't actually at O1's level, but it was enough that everybody got scared.
It was
Uh
close enough that people got real uncomfortable.
yes, exactly. Exactly. And so what you can do with this big V3 version is you can do this thing called distillation, which is you make a
Mhm.
smaller version of it with less parameters that you can run on a slower machine. So uh, there's these distilled versions of DeepSeek that are more reasonable, but you would still need a high-end NVIDIA chip, which is called a GPU, to run, or from another brand, but a graphics processing unit,
Yeah.
in order to run it on your computer. So that would be like like a RTX 4090 or A100, right? So those are what they're
And
called.
this isn't gonna feel like you're using a one at that level with a distilled model, I'm
No.
assuming. You're not going to get that level of quality, that level necessarily of thought. You're not going to get, uh, the level of everything that a truly built out full model gives you. So, I mean, I'm assuming we're talking about a very pared down version.
All right, so this is what DeepSeek looks like right here. This is its web portal. So technically, if you didn't want to run it on your computer, you could use it on like a little web interface like ChatGPT. Um, but if you wanted to run it open source, you would go to a website like this. You would go to Hugging Face, and this is the latest version of DeepSeek R1. And as you can see here, it shows you like how many downloads that it's had. It gives you all the details and the performance on it. And then if you go to, let's go to
If you're
DeepSeek's.
not a software engineer, that's gonna be a little intimidating, I would say.
This is very intimidating. Yeah,
For some people, even if you
definitely.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But as you can see here, here's the distilled versions, right? So this
Yeah.
is a distilled version of other open source models. A little too technical to get into, but this is 70 billion parameters versus the 600 billion one. And I'll give you one more visual. This is artificial analysis. This benchmarks all the different AI models that are out there. And it's one of the sources I like the best in order to compare. And I'm going to show you this visual here. So this is all of the top AI models by intelligence, and it shows you which ones are open weight, so which ones are open source like DeepSeek, and which
Okay.
ones are proprietary like ChatGPT.
Okay.
So the blue
Blue is
ones,
open weight.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So this is DeepSeek R1. So this is the newest one that just came out. And as you can see, the only models that are technically smarter than it are all of OpenAI's top reasoning models, thinking models, O3, O4 Mini, and O3 Pro, and the new Gemini Pro.
And
Other
Gemini
than that,
5 Pro, yeah.
this is like one of the best ones you can get, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's very comparable. And, the idea that you could theoretically run that on your own if you wanted to, if you were, in a business situation and had a need and desire to operate your own reasoning model that you didn't want out there in the wild, I would say. Uh, it is an option. It's just not cheap and easy.
Yeah, because this quality, this 68 version, I say 68 because there's a score that goes from 68 or from 1 to 100, and the top models are all around 70. So DeepSeek is 68. This version is not what you'll get. This is not the distilled version, right? The distilled
Yeah.
version is not at 68 intelligence. It'd probably be a lot lower on this list. Doesn't even show up here, I would
I was gonna
imagine.
say if it shows up on that list. I'm not even sure it will show up on that list.
Yeah,
Um,
so if you're gonna run a smaller version of this on your computer, you're not don't expect it to be like ChatGPT on your computer. Let's
yeah.
put it that way. Yeah.
Now there are tiny models though, not necessarily from DeepSeek, where I would say that is possible. Like there are some smaller parameter models from Meta in
Mm-hmm.
particular that you might be able to get some performance out of, but they're not going still there's a significant difference when you're looking at, these frontier edge research models. What they're doing is light years beyond what a lot of smaller tiny models are doing. But we'll see if that holds true. There was a little thing yesterday that Sam Altman posted on Twitter that I think is really interesting here about
Mm.
when how long do you think before an O3 Pro mini model could be ready to um,
Go
deploy on
on
a
your phone,
phone?
right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he asked 25, 26, 27, or 28. And most people, presumably because he asked the question, click 25.
Wow.
And, I thought that was really interesting, and, he implied and elaborated on it a little bit that, we do know they've been working on an open source model. We do know that it was delayed because they did something and decided that with just a little more time, they could make it a lot cooler, but we'll see what that is later.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Google and Microsoft both have smaller models that you allegedly can run on your phone. So people are making them. They're just not near the level of, the
Yeah,
frontier and what you could get if you run it on the cloud.
keep
Because
track.
when you run ChatGPT on the cloud, if people don't know, basically they have all these data centers that are processing it and processing everybody's requests all at once, and they can do a ton more because they just have so many NVIDIA GPUs, basically.
Yeah. While we've established that we're not gonna be running a big research model on our laptops, at least anytime in the foreseeable future. You never know what might happen, so I'll leave that caveat
Right.
there.
Right.
You mentioned a little while ago they have a web interface. I understand why a business would have a use for a hosted model and would want
Uh,
the privacy, security that it provides, but as an individual, is there any reason I wouldn't just go use their web interface if it's the same models?
yeah, that's a good question. And they also have an app too. So like
Oh,
ChatGPT
that's
has an
right.
app. They have an app.
I
Yeah.
forgot about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people download the app. A lot of people use it. It's very popular. But DeepSeek's app and web service have serious security flaws that I think people should know. For instance, it has very weak encryption. It has hard coded keys and unencrypted data transmission to China because the servers are based in China. So that means all of their databases are potentially exposed.
So
So
that means okay, okay, I get that. So that means it's being your data's all saved on Chinese servers, so as a result, it's subject to Chinese law, and if
Mhm.
the government requests it, companies have to hand that over. With that in mind, can you talk a little we mentioned military allegations earlier. Can you
That's right.
elaborate on that a little bit? Because I feel like that's
Yeah.
where we're kinda headed.
Yeah. So this was news that broke about a week ago. If you're watching this now, but U.S. officials say that they have actively figured out that DeepSeek is helping Chinese military and intelligence operations, and that they're actually feeding user data to Chinese military operations. Like they found it collecting keystroke patterns and device data and sending that directly to Chinese intelligence for their operations.
So it's spyware, basically
Yeah.
masquerading as a chatbot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a fair concern. I know there's some countries, I believe, that have absolutely outlawed it, aren't there? Like,
Mhm.
I think it was Italy, maybe Taiwan? Uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, and, US agencies too, right?
Oh, NASA!
Yeah,
Yeah, NASA.
yeah,
NASA had
yeah,
had, like, banned employee access or something. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting, interesting.
There's also the security testing. Do you wanna talk about that?
I I
'Cause the
I'm very curious. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where it gets really bad. I mean, DeepSeek failed 100% of its security tests. Like it could not block a single harmful prompt. So you know
Oh
how
my
last
gosh.
week we talked about safety testing and how all of the AI, big AI companies do that and try to prevent it from doing bad things when people prompt it. Yeah, DeepSeek couldn't block a single one.
Also, minor fail alert, we absolutely should have discussed this in that episode. Um,
Yeah,
and I
that's
guess it's
fair.
important to compare that to ChatGPT, and I wanna say ChatGPT is somewhere in the mid to upper 80s of at blocking harmful prompts.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's like 86 or something like that. It
Okay.
depends on the model, I'm sure, but
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
sure it does.
Um,
I'm sure it does,
yeah,
and I imagine that, Gemini and Anthropic are in that same ballpark, and,
yeah,
but it seems to only be here that the safety discussions are ongoing.
yeah, yeah, and as a result, I think the data that I've seen is that DeepSeek is like 11 times more likely to be exploited by cyber criminals for that reason,
Wow.
which makes sense.
Yeah,
Uh,
that does make sense, and honestly, there's a not necessarily to get too deep into today, but I think there's an interesting discussion around there and around the risk of open source. We always talk about
mhm,
the need to, be sure that we're not over centralizing the power of AI into just a handful of companies, as often happens
right,
with new technology. And
right.
and while I support that, there is an element of open source that, while I generally support it, does give me chills down my spine.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I can't remember if we said this last week or not, but you've definitely said this to me personally that there's legitimate concerns on both sides of
Yeah.
that argument. Yeah,
Yeah,
and they're
very
both
much
true.
so. I think, that, it is in fact true that we don't necessarily want all of the power centralized in the hands of a handful of powerful people. It is
Yeah.
simultaneously true that putting out an open weights model puts it into the hands of undesirable bad actors, and I think Jeffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize,
Hmm.
coincidentally, and is actually rather terrified of open source AI. There was a good interview on this a couple of weeks ago that I think we've mentioned in the newsletter.
Hmm.
Um, it's really interesting because it creates a situation where 2 situations are both true and both significant, and where's the line?
Yeah. Yeah. He specifically the quote that you're talking about is he equated giving out the open weights to essentially giving out like how to make nuclear fission
Yes.
to people. He's just giving and selling it. I think he said it like selling at a Walmart or something.
Yeah, yeah, and, it's not wrong. I mean, if you in terms of, like, it's a lot of money and investment for an individual, but as far as let's say a network of bad individuals,
Hmm.
or, a country with bad intentions, a government, any government, uh,
Hmm.
that money's a drop in the bucket when you consider that.
Yeah, well, and I also want to provide a counterpoint to the DeepSeek military allegations, right? Because if the wherever the information is centralized, that becomes a point of concern. So
Yeah.
take OpenAI for example. People are concerned because I believe there was a guy who's either an active government official or has ties to the U.S. military on their board now, and people are assuming that whatever chats you send to ChatGPT, now the government can potentially access it. We wrote a whole story about that, if you remember, about
Yeah.
how because of the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI, they're not allowed to delete any chats, even the ones that are
Yeah.
supposedly deleted and temporary. So
Because
that
the
opens a
government
can of
wants the
worms.
right to subpoena them.
Yeah, exactly. And so just because sure, maybe the Chinese government is getting your DeepSeek prompts, it doesn't mean that the U.S. government won't be able to eventually get
Yeah.
your ChatGPT prompts.
A thing that
Any
blew my
cloud
mind
provider is a
about that
risk.
was that we had a company that was intentionally not saving user data beyond 30 days, and the government's like, "Whoa, man, we might want that data." Uh,
Yeah.
that was a little, bothersome to me, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people felt that way. Now, obviously, like this was the ruling where this happened. It was very specific to the case, and
Yes.
OpenAI was like, "We're fighting this," and the judge said, "Whoa, I'm not trying to enable mass surveillance, so everyone needs to calm down." Um,
It got out of hand
so
real fast. Yeah.
yeah, so there's a lot of nuance with that conversation, and
Yeah.
crucially, OpenAI had a good blog where they wrote about what data is and isn't to be held at this point.
Yeah.
So everyone should look that up if you haven't looked it up yet.
Agreed. We can put a
Just
link to that below the video.
yeah, I'll include that. But it just goes to show, any cloud based, where you're sending prompts over the wire does have security risks involved. I mean, just like
Yeah.
anything that you post online has a security risk.
Yeah.
So just keep that in
So,
mind.
with all of that in mind, should people just avoid DeepSeek entirely?
I mean, you could, but not necessarily. It depends on how you use it. Like, I mean, I think a safe thing to bet is unless you're cool with China's government potentially seeing your prompts, like never use DeepSeek's direct app or website. I think that's a safe way to go about it.
I think that makes sense, but that doesn't necessarily apply to the open source models themselves, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So those are actually safer since you can either self-host them locally, like the really small distilled versions, like we are talking about earlier. You can use a tool like Olama to do that,
Yeah.
or there's another tool called LM Studio that I find is a lot more user friendly,
Okay.
and you can use that to run local models. Um,
We can also stick
that's
links to
one
both
option.
of those down below as well.
Yeah.
I guess you could
Yeah.
also use Amazon Bedrock, Azure. You could use
Base
AWS.
10, like we talked
Yeah,
about.
base
Yeah.
10. Yeah, yeah, there's a variety of directions you could go there.
Actually, artificial analysis has a huge list of all of the providers and how how much it costs to run it on there. Those come with risks too because you're
Yeah,
sending it over the wire.
yeah,
But if the key is keeping your data away from Chinese servers, if you care about that, especially if you're do sensitive business
yeah.
data or work in government, I think ChatGPT has a government version that you can use. So just be careful and aware, I would say.
Makes sense. I think I agree. I think the way to go is using a US-based provider probably, and, I mean, the thing is, like, what makes it attractive is that it's comparable to an O1 type model. It doesn't mean it's
Definitely.
better. The truth is, you could just go use an American model like you already are, and you're not
Yeah.
going to feel much of a difference is the truth of the matter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But sensitive work, I would probably self-host. There's a lot of other models other than DeepSeek that we could get into. Quen is another really popular model from Alibaba in China.
Oh, yeah.
But that one, people, that's one you can run. There's a lot of versions that you can run locally, especially if you have a good graphics card. And same. One thing we haven't touched on with any of this is that the models do have certain restrictions because they're based in China. So you can't criticize the government you can't get the AI to criticize the government, for example, things like that.
We don't have that problem with ours in the US, though.
No, no, no. Yeah, Grok. Even though Grok is owned by Elon Musk, it'll criticize Trump and Elon all the time. So
It
yeah,
does, it does. It's an interesting thing. That's a
yeah.
whole different discussion there, but there is an interesting discussion in there sometime in the future, I think. To cap this off today, let's do our round robin. I've got a question I wanna bounce off you.
Let's do it.
Uh, Plain and simple question. Would you personally, Grant Harvey, use DeepSeek for anything of value that you do in your day-to-day job or life? Do you?
This is a good question. So, as I don't remember if I said this earlier, but I have used DeepSeek before. But I used it mostly in a testing environment when it first came out, and I would use it to compare its answers versus ChatGPT's. But
Uh-huh.
as far as for anything serious, at this point, the cloud model I trust the most is Claude. And the reason for that is because they have very specific rules and policies that they share where they de-anonymize all prompts that's
Mhm.
not tied to you after a certain amount, and once you delete it, I think they do delete it within 7 days. I think they just
There's a
they
pretty standard clause between most of them that most of the US companies that they only hold the data for so long, basically to go back and find problems and errors and figure out what caused issues, things like that. I
yeah.
don't know specifically what's kept. That's cool. For me, I would say I have used it a couple of times, just more trying it out than anything, but I haven't really given it a deep hardcore test, but
Yeah,
I would say you should never ever use it on a work computer. I
that's
think is
fair.
probably a really good rule. I would also say that I I just don't have a use for it. The truth is, until very recently, ChatGPT 4.0 was my model.
Mhm.
And it still is for some more basic tasks here and there, but, with the cost drop of, O three, I'm pretty much just using O3 exclusively throughout the week now.
Okay. Yeah. Even for tasks that don't necessarily need the high power thinking ability.
It depends, sometimes it happens in a way where you're in the middle of something and you already have a chat going with O3 where you're
Mhm.
working and you have small follow-up questions that absolutely don't need to be O3, but I also don't wanna deal with the headache of going and opening a 4.0 chat, giving it the context of what we're talking about for what's a simple
Right.
request. So as long as I'm
That's fair.
staying within the limits, I usually just keep going. I mean, if it's a little later in the week and I feel like I've been leaning pretty heavy, I might not, but, as a general rule, I'm pretty much just using O3 for everything now, and, the truth is getting the best results I've ever gotten from anything.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really good to know because I don't know if I said this in the last episode, but these days I actually switch between all three of the major models, Claude, Gemini, and OpenAI a lot.
Yeah,
And I will compare the results that I get just because I don't want to be, I want to make sure that I'm getting the best option or get a
yeah,
lot of different options so that I can choose what I like the best, especially if I'm using it for, let's say, like a writing task,
yeah,
and I'm using different ones for research, and then I bring them in and I create different outlines, and then I can choose which one I like the most and then use that as my jumping off point to edit later.
yeah.
um yeah, I think that's I'd like to get a wide variety of opinions, I would
I
say.
like that, and I like the idea
Yeah.
of cross-checking them against one another. I like,
Yeah.
what I would say is I guess I was speaking more in terms of what I use during my workday constantly.
Yeah.
In my
Yeah.
personal life, I do tap into other tools. I mean, like, I use Perplexity daily. I
Yeah.
don't use it as much at work, but, I mean, I use it for listening to the news while I'm going to get a cup of coffee. I'll have it because I love that feature where it'll read it to me.
I've
Same
actually
with
never done that.
it's the best. It doesn't work on queries, which
Interesting.
Aravind Srinivas, please add the read button to the queries too. It's great on Discover articles, but it would be a whole lot greater if I could do that with every entry. I
Yeah.
use OpenAI's advanced voice mode every day. I
Mm.
have a variety of uses for that, mostly in my spare time. I use, uh, I use an unknown meta model in my glasses that I don't have on right now,
Mhm.
and I use Claude 3.5 to smack talk my buddies in our group chat. 'Cause
Wait, why Claude for the smack talk?
I don't know, it does a good job with, while I would absolutely choose '03 or honestly 4.5. Honestly, I'd choose 4.5 over any writing model.
Mm.
I've finally gotten to where I've spent some time with it, and it's impressive as a writer.
Mm.
But the reason being because I feel like Claude tells a creative story well. If what you're doing is creative writing,
Yeah.
I just kinda like Claude 3.5 for that. I still do, and I say that knowing that there are better models, there are better Claude models. But there's something that 3.5 had that I still don't quite feel in the newer models, and I can't quantify it, put a name on it, but there's just something about it that I liked, and, that's what I go back and forth to use, like, when it's late at night and a buddy texts you some nonsense, a lot of times instead of, garnering it with a worthy reply, I'll take that chat. I'll go throw it into 3.5 and tell it to give me an obnoxious, ridiculous response. And then I'll go copy that into my text chat, and
Do
I've
you
done that.
disclose this to your friends? Like, do they know that you're using
They
AI
figure
to
it
smack
out
talk?
after a while. We've had some great conversations. It borderline landed into a wild role-playing session once. It was the funniest
That's
thing.
funny.
But it's just, it's easy, it's fun. When I don't feel like I have the brain power left, because it's the end of the day, and dang it, I'm tired.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. This is a topic for another day, but we'll have to talk about the whole fair use thing that happened with Claude and
Oh,
how
yeah.
Claude Anthropic's the owner of Claude, they apparently like stole 7 million books, made an illegal database of them to train Claude. So
Your AI can
it
read books. You just can't go download them off Napster to.
yeah, exactly. So we'll have to talk about that. But maybe that's why it's
Yeah,
so creative. It's
I think
read a
that's a
lot of creative writing.
I think that's a good one. It's read a lot of, pirated creative writing. That's a good call.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say just on the topic of open source is that I would 100% use a local open source model when one is good enough that you can use it reliably on your computer. Like I think like sending stuff over the cloud all the time, that's not ideal, right? You need something that you can use tangible on your computer, maybe even built into your computer that can be your personal assistant where you are.
And if
And
your
I think
internet
one
goes down, you might still have your model.
Exactly. I think we do need that at some point because you just want something,
I
just
agree.
like you have a notepad that's like for your private thoughts on your computer or whatever. Like I think there definitely should be something that's built
I
into these
agree.
things that's useful eventually. And I'll use it no matter who makes it. I don't care if it's Chinese or
I don't care who it is,
whatever.
I'm gonna use it. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone, thanks so much for watching today. It's been a lot of fun. Please check us out on, Spotify, on Apple, on all of the other platforms where you can find us, or watch us on YouTube, and, we'll see you back next week.